really matters? That might be the most important question you can ask. So let's talk about it. Welcome to What Really Matters podcast, Everyday Spirituality with Karen Wyatt. Thank you so much for joining me here again today. If you've been listening for a while now, you'll know I'm at the very end of a series I've been doing. It's now an 11-part series on a trip I took to Italy, which was disrupted right at the beginning by the death of a patient on the day I was leaving for the trip. And I've covered my experience of practicing a novena during this vacation as I was traveling throughout Italy. So you've heard about my visits to Rome and Florence, then on to Cinque Terre and the small villages there. Siena, Cortona, Assisi, and last week I talked about my visit to Sorrento, which also included visiting Pompeii. The entire trip was profound and deeply moving, but also healing and transformative for me. But you may remember from last week's episode, I talked about being a little bit disappointed in the town of Sorrento because I visited two different churches there where I did my final novena, but I didn't feel deeply inspired by anything in those churches. It wasn't until I got to Pompeii and saw the Garden of the Refugees that I felt the inspiration I had been hoping for my last novena of this trip. But I'm following up today because there's additional information that I wanted to give you that kind of brings all of this full circle for me, at least. And so I want to tell you about a subsequent trip to Italy, which we took a number of years after this novena trip, and I retraced some of my footsteps through Italy on this second trip. And I went back to Sorrento and went back to those very same two churches that I had been disappointed in before and wanted to see if there was anything there that would inspire me. And the only thing I noticed that I hadn't seen before in one of the churches was a photograph of a contemporary older man whose name was Giuseppe Moscati, and he was Saint Giuseppe Moscati. And I saw a little photograph and a shrine to this person, but I had no idea who he was or what that meant. It was only several days later, we traveled to Naples and did a tour through the city of Naples and visited the Gesù Nuovo Church in Naples. And there I found an entire chapel designated to Saint Giuseppe Moscati. And I started reading some of the plaques about him to discover that he was a doctor. He had been born in 1880, practiced in Naples, and was this amazing, incredible person from everything that I've read about him. He was brilliant. He studied 20 different medical specialties in order to be the best diagnostician possible. He was a researcher as well, and his research led to the discovery of insulin. He worked tirelessly to research ways to eradicate cholera in Naples, which was a problem when he was practicing there. And he personally cared for many soldiers wounded in the First World War. He was an extremely compassionate man. There were stories of him caring for the poor for free, and he would often send them home with a prescription that they needed for their treatment, along with cash that he slipped into the bag along with their prescription when he knew that they were poor and needed help. He was courageous. Mount Vesuvius erupted another time in 1906, and he helped evacuate all the elderly and paralyzed patients from the hospital before the roof collapsed under the weight of the ash from Mount Vesuvius. And so this beautiful, lovely story, in light of having visited Pompeii on my previous visit and seeing all the destruction there, and then realizing this more contemporary doctor had single-handedly saved a number of patients from experiencing the same fate because of the ash from Mount Vesuvius by rescuing them and moving them to safety. He was also extremely pious and faithful in the Catholic faith. He wanted to become ordained as a priest, but was advised to become a third order Franciscan. And once again, we're hearing this term because that was true for St. Margaret of Cortona. Even St. Francis himself was a third order who was not ordained into the faith. And so this was common. It was really interesting to me, the saints that I had somehow been led to discover on my trip. Many of them were just ordinary lay people who had taken vows of poverty and practiced faithfully. So this was the case of Saint Giuseppe. He also took a holistic approach to his patients, and I loved this, a note that he had written to a young doctor. He wrote, "Remember, you must treat not only the bodies, but also souls with counsel that appeals to their minds and hearts rather than with cold prescriptions to be sent in to the pharmacist." I read this, and of course, I immediately fell in love with Dr. Giuseppe Moscati, who was a doctor of my own heart. I just resonated with the things that he wrote, and while not particularly with his practicing of his Catholic faith, but just his belief in love and the power of love to heal, and the fact that he cared for patients with so much compassion. It was said that Dr. Moscati could diagnose a patient without even seeing them, simply by hearing their symptoms, and he was renowned for that in the hospital. His colleagues would come up and tell him about one of their patients and describe their symptoms. He could diagnose the patient, recommend the treatment, and he had an extremely good record of accuracy in making the diagnosis and in coming up with the appropriate treatment for patients. So in his story, Giuseppe died very suddenly in 1927 at the young age of 46. And he had worked at the hospital that morning, had gone home for the afternoon. He saw a few patients at home, and he sat down in his chair at 3 p.m. and fell asleep and never woke up again. And kind of a remarkable death to have, such a sudden death for no explained reason. And at that particular time, they just didn't know what had caused it. He wasn't really known to have any medical conditions himself, and it was a young age to die, although we have seen that many of the other saints also died at a very young age. So following his death, there came many reports of people who had been healed by praying to Dr. Giuseppe after he died. And one story that was told, there had been a young man dying from leukemia, and he was suddenly and inexplicably cured when his mother dreamed of a doctor in a white coat. She was able to identify the doctor as Giuseppe after her priest showed her a photograph. Her son was fit and well, completely healed and cured of his leukemia. And because of his story, along with all these other miracles that had been reported, Giuseppe was canonized as a saint in 1987 at the Church of Gesù Nuovo in Naples. Like, there's this chapel designated to Dr. Moscati, and inside is a huge bronze statue of Dr. Moscati. And he's holding out one hand. And while we were there, I saw it. There's a constant progression of pilgrims going through the chapel, and they kneel at the altar of the chapel, and then they reach up and touch the hand of Dr. Moscati. And so the hand is shiny gold from all of the other hands that have touched it over time. But that room in the chapel, and there's also an entire other room behind it, they are filled with ex votos, which are these tiny red and silver plaques of thanksgiving that people bring in who have had their prayers answered with the help of Giuseppe. And usually on the front of each plaque is a picture that depicts how their prayer was answered, whatever it was, for an injury or an illness or something else. There's a symbol on each one of the ex votos for whatever type of prayer was answered. And this room is literally totally filled, every square inch of each wall completely filled with these ex votos of people who've brought them in who say their prayers have been answered by Giuseppe. So this was really a remarkable experience, getting familiar with this man, a doctor who resonates with me in my own heart, his compassion and caring, his ideals of love, and to see the devotion that has been pouring out for him, and also the gratitude and the fact that he's still apparently working miracles and healing people. And even the church where his chapel is located was actually bombed during World War II and received almost no damage. And the church has saved this huge bomb casing. You can still view it inside the church, but they attribute that to another miracle of Giuseppe Moscati, that the church was not harmed, even though this bomb came crashing through the dome of the church. So I was so inspired by getting to know Dr. Giuseppe Moscati that I went to the gift shop and I bought a couple of books about his life, and I bought a book of some of his writings, which continued to inspire me as well. And something I came across that has everything to do with my entire trip to Italy and everything I've been talking about. The fact that my young patient died the day that I left on this trip, and I was devastated by grief and guilt over his death, and it also brought up all of my grief and guilt over my father's death. And one of the things that I was able to read in the writings of Saint Giuseppe is a letter that he wrote to the father of a girl who died in Giuseppe's care. So in this case, Giuseppe wasn't able to work a miracle. His charity, his love, his compassion, his brilliance, his hard work and diligence, and his faith did not save the life of this girl. And so Giuseppe wrote a letter to his father, and I saved just a few of the sentences to read here. He wrote, "I've got here on my table, among the first flowers of spring, one of your daughter's portraits, and I rest while writing and meditate upon the frailty of human things. Beauty, every enchantment of life, has an end. Only eternal love lasts. The one that is the reason of every good action, that survives us, that is hope and religion, because love is God." And so reading this, I was really touched that Giuseppe Moscati was able to acknowledge his own grief and write his letter in support of the father of a child he couldn't save, and to reflect on the fact that only love is eternal, only love will last. No matter our efforts, no matter how hard we work, no matter how many miracles we might be capable of performing, ultimately, we cannot save these frail human bodies that we care for and that we love. And this letter itself was so powerful to me, and I imagined writing the same thing to the father of the boy who died under my care, and to have such an open heart as Father Giuseppe, and such a willingness to not blame himself for the fact that the girl didn't survive, but to simply accept it as part of how life works in this world. And I realized that's what I need to get to. I need to be able to get to a place where I can see such a big picture of life and death, that I remove myself from guilt. I remove myself from responsibility over life and from needing to be the person that could save every life, and being able to be a person that helped as much as I possibly could and loved as much as I could, and yet surrendered to the fact that death is inevitable and that everyone will ultimately die. And so there, several years later in Naples and in the works of Dr. Giuseppe Moscati, I found some of the answers in a way that I was searching for, some of the remedies for the pain of guilt that I was carrying with me on that trip, and some soothing calmness and love and compassion for my own grief that I had carried with me over the years. And even though I wasn't able to see this, I didn't recognize that there was anything important about Dr. Giuseppe Moscati on my first trip when I was in Sorrento and saw his photograph. It's funny how several years later, perhaps I was more ready to see it. I was more ready to recognize and feel a resonance with this person, and to also understand that there was a message in his life for me as a doctor in my own life, and to help me answer my questions about how will I go on practicing medicine and continuing to be a doctor? How will I continue caring for patients when I have learned that my love may not save everyone? And my love and my compassion, no matter how much I know, no matter how much I have learned, how hard I try, how many hours I work, how much I organize my clinic, I may not be able to save the lives of every patient because death is inevitable. So this amazing trip to Italy and the subsequent trip later that gave me even more insights into what was happening is something that will live forever in my memory as a profound journey that opened me up not just to healing the grief and guilt that I carried, but also to growing spiritually and transforming in ways that I may never have imagined. And I wanted to share it all with you for you to get a feel for this. And because I also really advocate this idea of traveling when we're in difficult times, when we're suffering, of going to someplace new because of the fact that it shifts us out of ways we may be stuck in our thinking. It takes us to new places, helps us see new things in new ways, and may open us up to more creative ways of healing, to learning things that are available for us to learn, but that we may have been blind to in the past. So I invite you to consider, if you're feeling stuck or struggling with grief and guilt that you haven't been able to move forward on in a very long time, perhaps there's some travel that could make a difference for you, just as it did for me. And I highly recommend the practice of a novena, of imagine 9 different stops, 9 different places on your trip where you might view something somewhat differently each day, and add a little piece to the puzzle or the mystery that you're trying to figure out. And perhaps there will be a day down the road when all the pieces will start to come together, and you'll look back and be able to see the perfection of that picture that has been unfolding within your life for all of these years, even though you couldn't recognize it, even though you couldn't see how some of the pieces fit together so perfectly on your behalf. So I hope this has been helpful to you. And I wanted to let you know that this is going to be my last episode on this podcast for a while. You might be able to hear it in my voice, but I've been having a respiratory illness lately, and I'm also having troubles with my voice. I need to do some vocal rest for a while, And I've decided this is a really good place for me to take a break and do some more contemplation and see where I end up next. So I can't tell you when I'll be back in this podcast, only that I'm trusting that when the intuition strikes and when I know it's the right time, I'll record again. And so trust that as well. And please go back and listen to old episodes if you need something else to hear. I feel bad, actually. I feel guilty that I won't be here because I know there are some people that are devoted listeners, and I love you so much. I'm sending all of my positive energy to you, and I hope going back and listening to old episodes will keep you going for a while. But please send me your love as well, and know that I'm simply working on my own journey and my own healing, and trying to love and honor myself and allow some space for myself for the healing of my throat that I need. And I'm going to end this with a prayer from a prayer to Joseph Moscati. And this is a prayer for doctors to say to Dr. Moscati. And I found it on a website for medical providers. And I thought, oh, this might be an appropriate way for me to end this episode since I won't see you for a while. So I will read this prayer to St. Joseph Moscati, or St. Giuseppe Moscati. O St. Joseph Moscati, doctor with a huge heart, in the exercise of your profession, you cured the body and spirit of your patients. Turn towards us, too, who now run to you with faith in your intercession. Give us physical and spiritual health so that we can serve our brothers with generosity, alleviate the pain of those that suffer, give comfort to the sick, consolation to the afflicted, and hope to the hopeless. Make that the sick might encounter doctors like you, human and of higher consciousness. The youth find in you a model of life, the workers an example, the old comfort, and the dying hope in eternal consciousness. Be for all of us a sure guide. Teach us to work with serenity, honesty, and charity, to be able to complete in a compassionate way our everyday tasks. St. Joseph Moscati, pray for us. And with that, I will say goodbye to you for now. Thank you for being my faithful listeners. I really appreciate you so much. And I'll continue to think of you and send love to you every day, even if I'm not recording for a while. So while I'm away, remember that we're here for love. So face your fear, be ready for whatever life brings you next, and love each and every moment of your very precious life. Bye-bye.